It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind that Sheriff Jack Thompson rarely got to enjoy. He had just poured himself a cup of coffee, the steam rising in soft curls, when a loud knock rattled his front door. This wasn't the casual kind of knock from a neighbor dropping by. This one had authority. Annoyed but curious, Jack set down his mug and made his way to the door, opening it to find two men standing stiffly on his porch. Both wore matching polo shirts, navy blue with CHY security, embroidered in uneven, cheap stitching. One was wiry with a sharp face and a clipboard tucked under his arm. The other was broader, standing with an air of forced importance. They weren't familiar, which was already strange. Jack had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade and knew everyone on the block. "Morning," the wiry one said, flashing a badge that looked flimsier than a dollar store toy. "We're conducting an inspection for compliance violations. Need to check your property." Jack leaned against the doorframe, unimpressed. "That right?" he asked, his tone casual but with an edge. The broader one, who clearly liked being the muscle, stepped forward. "We received multiple complaints about an unauthorized structure in your backyard. We need to take a look." Jack took a slow sip of his coffee, letting them sweat a little. "What structure?" The clipboard guy flipped through some papers, trying to act official. "A shed. Records indicate you built it without approval." Jack blinked. "I don't have a shed." There was a brief silence before the two exchanged glances. Clipboard guy recovered first. "Maybe it's a clerical error. We still need to inspect your yard." Now Jack was sure something was off. He had dealt with his fair share of criminals, smooth ones, dumb ones, desperate ones. But these two were a special breed. They carried themselves like men used to getting their way, probably because they had, until now. "Mind showing me some paperwork?" Jack asked, shifting his tone just enough to make it a challenge. The clipboard guy hesitated, then flipped a random page his way. It was a sloppy printout of some HOA rule about unauthorized structures. Nothing specific to his house. No violation notice, no date, no official letterhead. Jack handed it back. Not good enough. The broad one, Travis, according to his name tag, sighed impatiently. "Look, we're just trying to do our job. Either you let us inspect the property, or we'll have to take further action." Jack almost laughed. These guys had no idea who they were dealing with. He considered his options, shut the door and let them try their scam elsewhere, or let them keep digging their own hole. He chose the latter. "You know what?" Jack said, stepping aside. "Go ahead. Let's see this illegal shed of mine." They hesitated again, maybe sensing a shift in the air, but Travis, clearly the more aggressive of the two, grunted and nodded toward the side gate. "We'll just take a quick look." Jack followed them as they strutted toward the backyard like they owned the place. He watched, waiting, as Travis reached for the gate latch. "You sure you want to do that?" Jack asked, his voice low. Mike, the clipboard guy, shot him a look. "We have authority." Jack let them push their luck. Travis pulled at the latch. It didn't budge. Annoyed, he tried again, this time with more force. Jack watched his patience snap. "This gate's locked," Travis growled. Jack took another sip of coffee. "Sure is." Travis turned to him, chest puffed. "You need to open it. Now." Jack tilted his head. "Or what?" That was the moment things started unraveling. Mike tried a different approach, stepping in with a fake conciliatory smile. "Listen, we're just here to help keep the neighborhood in line. It's nothing personal. Let's make this easy." Jack grinned. "I'd love to. Just show me a legal order allowing you to enter my property." Silence. Then Travis, visibly losing patience, grabbed the top of the gate and started yanking. That was enough. Jack set his coffee down on the porch railing and reached into his back pocket. Before they could react, he flipped open his badge. The shift was immediate. Mike stepped back so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. Travis froze, his hands still on the gate, his mouth opening then closing. "Sheriff Jack Thompson," Jack said, his voice steady. "And you two just made a very big mistake." Mike's face lost all color. "Whoa, now, this is just a misunderstanding." Jack took a step forward, his presence filling the space. "Trespassing. Attempted fraud. Impersonating security personnel." He pulled out his cuffs. "Sound about right?" Travis lifted his hands like that would somehow erase the last 5 minutes. We didn't mean a..." Jack turned him around and snapped the cuffs on. Mike barely had time to react before Jack had him secured too. As he read them their rights, his radio crackled. He picked it up. "Jack, you good? Neighbors said you had some guys lurking around." Jack smirked. "Yeah, I'm good. But these guys aren't." A few minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. Two officers stepped out, taking in the scene. One of them, Officer Reynolds, let out a low whistle. "Boss," he said, shaking his head. "They really tried this on you?" Jack chuckled as he handed them over. "Looks like it." As Mike and Travis were led away, Jack retrieved his coffee, still warm. He took a sip, enjoying the morning again. Jack had seen a lot of stupid criminals in his time, but these two were climbing the ranks fast. Even after flashing his badge, there was a moment, just a flicker, where it looked like they were trying to decide whether to double down. Mike's mouth opened like he was going to argue, then snapped shut again when Jack raised an eyebrow. Travis, on the other hand, still had his hands in fists, like he was debating whether brute force could get him out of this. It couldn't. The problem with con men was that they got too comfortable. They pulled their scams over and over, fooling the same kinds of people who didn't ask too many questions, who got scared when a fake authority figure showed up demanding compliance. But they had made a fatal mistake in picking the wrong house. Jack didn't rush. He let them sit in their own bad decisions, waiting to see if either of them would try to talk their way out of it. Mike was the first to crack. "Listen, this isn't what you think, okay?" He forced a nervous chuckle. "We're just following orders." Jack let that hang in the air for a second. "Whose orders?" Mike hesitated. Travis shot him a sharp look, a silent warning. Jack sighed. "Right. The hard way, then." He reached for the radio clipped to his belt, but before he could call it in, Travis made his move. It was sloppy, more desperation than strategy. He lurched forward like he was going to shove past Jack and bolt. Bad choice. Jack sidestepped, grabbed Travis's wrist, and spun him into the fence. The handcuffs clicked shut in one smooth motion. Mike held up both hands, his clipboard forgotten on the ground. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay. I'm done." Jack turned to him, unimpressed. "Hands behind your back." Mike complied so fast it was almost funny. Jack cuffed him and took a step back, making sure they were both secured before finally grabbing his radio. "This is Sheriff Thompson. Got 2 suspects in custody. Need a patrol car at my location." The reply came fast. "Copy that. Dispatching now." Jack exhaled, looking at his 2 newest arrests. "You know," he said conversationally, "I wasn't even planning on working today." Travis muttered something under his breath. Mike, sweating bullets, tried again. "Look, man, we were just trying to make a little money. No harm, no foul, right?" Jack gave him a flat stare. "You tried to break into my house." Mike swallowed hard. "Okay, yeah, that part, bad move. But we weren't going to steal anything. Just maybe collect a fine." Jack shook his head. "You two ever hear of a background check?" Neither answered, which was fair. They were too busy stewing in their own regret. It took less than 5 minutes for the patrol car to roll up. 2 officers stepped out, one of them shaking his head when he saw Jack. "Sheriff," Officer Reynolds said, barely hiding his smirk. "Heard you had some trouble in the neighborhood." Jack motioned to the 2 cuffed men. "Couple of fake HOA cops. Thought they could strong-arm their way into my backyard." Reynolds whistled low. "Man, they really picked the wrong house." Then he helped them load Travis and Mike into the back seat, ignoring the sputtering protests that they weren't real criminals. As the car pulled away, Jack dusted off his hands, picked up his still-warm coffee, and walked back inside. Maybe now he could finally enjoy his morning. Down at the station, Jack watched from the other side of the interrogation glass as Mike and Travis sat in a room that suddenly seemed a lot smaller than it had a few hours ago. Their bravado had mostly evaporated, though Travis still had that tight-jawed, arms-crossed look of someone who thought they could muscle their way through a problem. Mike, on the other hand, looked like a man trying to mentally scroll through every possible excuse that might get him out of this. The evidence against them was already stacking up. When the officers had searched their vehicle, they'd found a pile of blank violation notices with various fake infractions pre-written, waiting to be filled in with homeowner addresses. There was also a wad of cash, likely collected from previous victims, and an old, beat-up laptop that Jack was willing to bet contained a whole lot more than grocery lists. Detective Owens walked in, dropping a file onto the table in front of Jack. "You're going to love this," he said, flipping it open. Jack scanned the contents. The 2 men weren't just running a one-time scam. They'd been at this for months, maybe even longer. Multiple neighborhoods. Multiple fake HOA security visits. They weren't just finding people, they were breaking into backyards, stealing equipment, even forcing homeowners into paying for removal fees for violations that didn't exist. Jack exhaled, shaking his head. Unbelievable. Owen smirked. Yeah, and get this. There's a complaint on record from last year about two guys matching their description shaking down an elderly couple in the next county over. Same scam. Homeowner tried to fight back, and they threatened to have his property seized. Jack's jaw clenched. He had seen plenty of lowlifes in his career, but guys who targeted people who couldn't fight back always got under his skin. Owens gestured toward the interrogation room. Ready to go ruin their day? Jack pushed open the door and stepped inside. Mike flinched. Travis stared straight ahead, trying to act like this was just an inconvenience. Jack took his time settling into the chair across from them. He folded his hands on the table and waited. The silence stretched. He'd found that most criminals cracked faster when you let them squirm in it. Finally, Mike spoke first. Look, man, Jack held up a hand, stopping him. Then he slid the file across the table, flipping it open so they could see the contents. You want to explain this? Mike's eyes darted over the pages, sweat forming at his hairline. Travis, predictably, leaned back and scoffed. You got nothing. Jack tilted his head. Nothing? You mean besides the fake violation notices, the stolen equipment, the laptop full of fake citations? He tapped the file. Or the fact that you've been running this scam in at least 3 different counties? Mike swallowed hard. Travis cut him off. We're not talking without a lawyer. Jack nodded, unsurprised. That's your right. He leaned back, watching them both carefully. But just so we're clear, this isn't some slap-on-the-wrist situation. You impersonated security personnel. You attempted fraud. And given your history, I'm guessing we're going to find a whole lot more once we dig deeper. Mike let out a small, broken sigh. It was just a hustle, man. Just a way to make some extra cash. Jack raised an eyebrow. By robbing people? Travis rolled his eyes. We weren't robbing anyone. We gave them a chance to pay a fine. That's all. Jack scoffed. A fine you made up under authority you don't have. He shook his head. You ever think about what happens when you intimidate the wrong person? Someone older? Someone who's scared of losing their home. You ever think about how much damage you did? Mike wouldn't meet his gaze. Travis stayed stubbornly silent. Jack stood up, pushing the chair back slowly. Well, I hope the money was worth it, because right now you're looking at multiple counts of fraud, trespassing, and attempted burglary. And that's just for today. Once we start digging into your past cases, you might want to get comfortable in that cell. Travis's jaw tightened, but Mike finally cracked, slumping in his seat. Jack turned and walked out, letting the detectives handle the rest. By the time the charges were finalized, the case had expanded far beyond a simple backyard trespassing incident. More victims had come forward, homeowners who had been scammed, threatened, and even robbed by the duo. Some had paid hundreds of dollars in fake fines, too intimidated to question what they thought was a legitimate authority. Mike and Travis were booked on multiple counts, and Jack made sure the press got the details. People needed to know what kind of scams were out there, and more importantly, to stand their ground against anyone who tried to intimidate them with false authority. As he left the station that evening, Jack couldn't help but shake his head at how the day had played out. Some criminals were smart, some were dangerous, and some, like these two, were just dumb enough to pick the worst possible target. By the time Jack got home, his phone was already blowing up. News traveled fast in small communities, and even faster when the sheriff himself was involved in the story. A quick glance at his messages showed a mix of amused texts from his deputies, concerned notes from neighbors, and one from his wife that simply read, "Please tell me I don't have to bail you out of anything." He smirked and sent back, "Not this time." It didn't take long before the local news got wind of the situation. The next morning, a reporter was standing outside Jack's house, microphone in hand, dramatically gesturing toward his front gate as she spoke into the camera. An unbelievable story out of Millbrook County today, where 2 men posing as HOA security officers were caught red-handed attempting to intimidate homeowners, only to discover the latest target was none other than the county sheriff himself. We spoke with Sheriff Jack Thompson earlier today, who had this to say. The clip cut to Jack, clearly caught outside the station on his way to his truck, looking mildly annoyed but playing along. Well, he said, adjusting his sunglasses, I'd say they should have picked a different house. But honestly, I'm glad they didn't. Saves us all the trouble of tracking them down later. The segment ended with the anchor laughing before diving into some pre-written line about how crime doesn't pay. Jack turned off the TV, shaking his head. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from one of his neighbors, Joe. Man, I saw the news. HOA crime unit? You can't make this stuff up. Apparently they could, Jack replied. The next time he went for a walk in the neighborhood, Jack was met with a chorus of greetings and more than a few jokes. Hey, Sheriff, you get that illegal shed taken care of? You thinking about joining the HOA board? I hear they need some real law enforcement. Even old Mr. Parker, who never had much to say, chuckled as he walked by. Good to know we've got a real sheriff around here. Can't trust these fake ones anymore. Jack just shook his head. Yeah, well, I don't work for the HOA. A week later, the real HOA came knocking. Linda Foster, the actual HOA president, looked exasperated as she stood on Jack's porch, clutching a stack of papers. Sheriff, I just want to make it absolutely clear that these men had nothing to do with our HOA. We don't conduct surprise inspections, and we certainly don't break into people's yards. Jack leaned against the doorframe, nodding. I figured as much, Linda. She sighed in relief. We're sending out official letters to all homeowners explaining what happened and making sure they know our actual procedures. The last thing we need is people thinking we're running around impersonating officers. Good idea, Jack said. Though I wouldn't worry too much. People around here have a good sense of humor about it. Linda frowned. I don't think the HOA wants to be the punchline of a joke, Sheriff. Jack shrugged. Then I'd suggest keeping your security team under control. You never know who they might run into. She gave him a weary look before handing over an official HOA letter and heading back to her car. Jack watched her go, shaking his head. He wasn't much for HOA politics, but he did appreciate that they were trying to fix the mess. The real cherry on top came at the next neighborhood barbecue. Every few months, the community threw a block party, and this time Jack was the center of attention, not that he wanted to be. He would have been perfectly happy standing by the grill, enjoying his burger, but his neighbors had other plans. Someone had set up a small table in the middle of the lawn, and on it sat a tiny wooden shed, complete with a sign that read, Sheriff Jack's illegal structure. Jack sighed, shaking his head as he walked over. Really, Joe? Joe grinned. Hey, we figured you should have some kind of souvenir from the whole thing. Another neighbor, Karen, piped up. We were thinking of making you the official HOA sheriff, but we figured you've got enough on your plate. Jack took one look at the tiny shed and let out a laugh. I appreciate it, but if you put me on the HOA board, I might have to start writing real fines. That got a round of groans and chuckles. As the night went on, the jokes kept coming, but Jack didn't mind. His neighbors were safe, the scammers were behind bars, and best of all, he finally had time to enjoy a barbecue without chasing down criminals. As he took a bite of his burger, he thought to himself, next time, maybe I really will build a shed just to see who shows up. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.